I'm going to try to get rich using cold brew coffee. Welcome to Cold Brew Bucks, the channel that uses coffee to build wealth. I live in the United States, and despite the US being one of the richest countries in the world, many people struggle with their finances. So many people have high levels of debt and no savings or investments, yet they are still making frivolous purchases, like going out and buying coffee on a daily basis. Introducing Cold Brew Bucks. I make my own coffee, and I've always wondered how much money I am saving relative to going to Starbucks every day, like so many people do. So this project is going to track how much money I save by making cold brew every morning instead of buying it. Not only am I going to track the savings, but I'm also going to invest the savings into an index fund and then track the value daily over time. The purpose of this project is to track my coffee savings, teach people about investing and the power of compound interest, show people that making coffee, and other things, yourself, isn't that hard, and have a little fun in the process. Making the cold brew. Now let's actually talk about the fun part, the cold brew. I buy my coffee beans from Costco, and it costs $19 for a 32-ounce bag of whole beans, so it costs about 59 cents per ounce of beans. If I open the bag of beans, I will vacuum seal and freeze the beans I don't use. I make a pretty large batch of cold brew for the entire week for both my wife and me, so I usually use about 10 ounces of beans per batch, which breaks down to about $5.95 worth of beans. I don't have any fancy grinder, so I just put my beans in the blender and hit the pulse button a few times to coarsely grind my beans. I find that my beans have a more consistent size if I blend them up in batches, so this time I blended them up 5 ounces at a time. I am absolutely no coffee expert, but what I have learned from doing this enough is that you don't want the super fine coffee grounds mixed in with your cold brew because the coffee sludge that it makes will clog up your filter and block your delicious cold brew from escaping. Because of that, I sift out my beans using a fine mesh strainer so only the coarse grounds go into the cold brew steeping container. I save the fine coffee grounds that make it through the strainer and end up making a cup of coffee with those. It is usually around 1 ounce of fine coffee grounds, and I use a 12-to-1 water to coffee ratio. The golden ratio for hot coffee is about 16-to-1, but since I'll be using this for iced coffee, I start with less water as some of the ice will melt and dilute it a little bit more. I let it steep for around 5 minutes and then strain it into a bowl with a wet coffee filter on a fine mesh strainer. Once that strains and cools down, I put it on ice, and that will be my coffee for the day. It's not cold brew, just iced coffee, but it's a nice change of pace and still delicious if done properly. Alright, back to the cold brew. I weigh what's left of my beans, usually around 9 ounces or so, because I end up making a cold brew concentrate with a 4-to-1 water to coffee ratio. I pour in around 36 ounces of filtered water into the steeping container and then mix everything with a spoon so all of the beans are incorporated. After that, I cover the steeping container and then wait. I've found that I enjoy the cold brew best if it has been steeping for at least 18 hours, so I try to get this process done before noon on Sundays so my cold brew has plenty of time to steep and be ready on Monday morning. From start to finish, this process usually takes me about 20 minutes, which is not bad for a week's worth of cold brew. The next morning, I open the latch to let the cold brew filter out. It takes a few minutes for it to all get out, and this batch got me about 24.5 ounces of cold brew concentrate. When I make my actual serving of cold brew, I use 2 ounces of the concentrate. So $5.94 worth of beans gets me about 12.25 servings of cold brew, and I get that one iced coffee, so it's about 13.25 servings of cold coffee beverages. That brings each serving to about 45 cents. So to make my cold brew, I use the 2 ounces of concentrate and mix it with 1 ounce of half and half, which costs about 12.5 cents per serving, and then put about 4 or 5 ounces of filtered water in there. That brings my total to about 58 cents per serving. I use an OXO cold brew steeping system, and the instructions recommend a 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 ratio of concentrate to milk or water, and my drink fits that ratio. I usually prep the cold brew the night before and keep it in the fridge in an insulated tumbler, and then put my ice in it in the morning to reduce the amount of dilution. If the concentrate and water I'm adding are both at room temperature, I might put a little less water and a little more ice to account for the dilution. Now let's talk about Starbucks, more specifically, their prices. Where I live, including taxes, you pay $4.23 for the 12-ounce tall, $4.76 for the 16-ounce grande, $5.30 for the 24-ounce venti, and $5.62 for the 30-ounce Trenta. After doing some research, I'm going to assume that the liquid to ice ratio is around 2-to-1, so 2/3 of the drink is actual coffee and 1/3 is ice. That would mean that the tall is 8 ounces of cold brew, grande is 10.7 ounces, venti is 16 ounces, and the Trenta is 20 ounces of cold brew. Since my daily drink matches with the tall size at Starbucks, that is the size I'm going to base my comparison on. However, I didn't think it would be fair to use that price difference between buying and making your own cold brew, because at Starbucks, the smaller the size, the less bang for your buck you get. What I decided to do instead is figure out how much 8 ounces of cold brew, without ice, costs at the rate for each size, take the average of that, and use that as my daily savings. Especially because I know some people drink more coffee per day than I do. I also know that people could technically buy a larger size of cold brew and split it up between multiple days. My wife does that sometimes, actually. Anyway, when I averaged the cost of 8 ounces of cold brew from Starbucks, it came to about $3.17. After subtracting the 58 cents it cost me to make my cold brew, I get $2.59 worth of savings for every 8 ounces of cold brew I make. For my purposes, I'm going to round that down to $2.50 so the number's a bit cleaner. Finance. Now let's talk about what I'm going to do with this daily savings of $2.50. I'm going to put this money into an investment account and buy $2.50 worth of an index fund every day, that the market is open, of course, and track the account value over time. First of all, if you're not exactly sure what an index fund is, it's basically like a basket of many different stocks or bonds that tries to copy how the overall stock market is doing. People like index funds because they give you a little bit of many different investments, making it less risky than putting all of your money in one thing. Plus, the fees are cheap because you don't need to pay someone to constantly pick and choose which investments to buy. I'm going to let the power of compound interest take over and hopefully allow me to save a good amount of money and let it grow over time. So my daily investment of $2.50 is an investment technique referred to as dollar cost averaging. Dollar cost averaging helps you invest without stressing about the best time to buy. You invest a fixed amount of money on a regular basis, buying more shares when the prices are low and less shares when the prices are high. This smooths out the cost over time, making investments simpler and less risky. If you're wondering if this is going to get me rich overnight, it's definitely not. However, if I continue to do this long term, the savings could add up. Using a dollar cost averaging tool from buyupside.com, you can calculate how much money you would have made if you started doing this at a specific time. So I'm on the buyupside.com dollar cost averaging tool, and this will show me how much money you would have made if you had a specific initial investment and recurring monthly investment. I'm using the FXIAX index fund. It's just like the S&P 500, but through Fidelity Investments, where all my money is at. For my project, I'm going to be doing a daily investment, so this is not going to be the exact same, but it's going to be very close enough. So $2.50 per day, if there's about 30 days in a month, that's going to give you about $75 per month. So this will just tell us if I invested $75 per month, every single month from a specific time point, how much money I would have invested and then how much the account value would be. So I'm going to go 10 years back. So let's see, January 2013, and I'm going to calculate the returns. I realized I typed in the wrong stock ticker. It should be FXAIX. Anyway, I'm going to calculate returns now. So here's all my information. The important stuff is the total investment is $9,900 over a 10-year period. So that actually adds up to a lot. If you didn't invest your money, this is how much you would save if you're doing that $2.50 every single day. But if you invest it, notice the account value is just about double that. It is 99% larger than that. So this shows a little bit of the power of compound interest. Now I'm going to do this with another one. Now this FXAIX fund that I'm going to be investing the money in did not exist 20 years ago. So I'm going to do a different one that is a similar idea. SPY is another index fund. This time, let's try it from 2003. So this is 20 years. So the total investment is $18,000 over 20 years. That does kind of seem like a lot of money. But if you did this starting in 2003 and then took your money out in 20 years after that, today, you would have gained almost 50 grand right here. So plus your initial investment, so you'd have a total of $67,000. So if you do this coffee trick for 20 years, you do have the chance to make money. Now, I'm not a financial advisor, but a financial advisor would tell you that past performance does not indicate what's going to happen in the future. So there's always a risk with investing, but ideally the market will go up. And if it does, we can hopefully use our cold brew savings to build some wealth. This mindset can be used in other non-coffee domains like meal prepping instead of eating out, or even something as crazy as cutting your own hair, which I definitely don't do. Anyways, if you're interested in following this project, be sure to subscribe to the channel for daily updates, and more importantly, enjoy your cold brew.